Tottenham have got their second Premier League game this Saturday at Wembley Stadium. After the win at Newcastle last weekend, Tottenham will really be looking to get 2 wins out of 2, definitely against the newly promoted side, Fulham. I asked the Fulham podcast, Fulhamish, to give me their thoughts and preview of the game. Here it is.
Hi there, it's Jack from the Fulhamish Podcast here, talking ahead of Fulham's game against Spurs this Saturday at Wembley. I think, it's going to be a good game of two teams who like to play football. Many of you will have seen from last season and from our first game this season that we're a team that likes to get the ball on the deck to, really try and give teams a game, and I think that's what we'll do against Tottenham. Ivanovic has no intent this season, I think, of becoming a defensive unit, of becoming a team who will stick 10 men behind the ball. Fulham are very much going to try and dominate possession even in the big games against Spurs, against the top 6 and away from home. We think that Fulham are going to attempt to play and enforce that Ivanovic style on the Premier League, which is a good thing for football in general, but maybe not so in terms of results. I think the players that obviously Spurs will have to watch out for, all about Ryan Sessegnon, considering the continuing links this summer, but he, I think, will have a slow start to the Premier League as he acclimatises to differences in defending, differences in the tactical nature of the game, and having, not as much space as he did last year. The danger men, I'd say, are Alexander Mitrovic, who will be a handful no matter what happens in a physical sense, but also he just looks so much more comfortable in a Fulham shirt than I think he ever did at Newcastle. Jean-Michel Seri, a new signing this summer who the big boys were after, looks really, really good after one game. He had a debut to remember where he didn't really put a foot wrong, and looks like he can spray those passes all over the park, which is a lovely thing to watch from a Fulham perspective. And Tom Kearney, who was our creative mastermind last year and loves to pick that final ball. So they're the players I would highlight first off as the ones to watch for Spurs fans. I think after last year's heroics, we're all hopeful for another good season. I think a good season for us would be, just staying in the Premier League. A lot of people were talking after the amount of signings we made this summer that Fulham should be looking to kick on, maybe make top 10. But I think that's potentially very, very optimistic. Palace was a real bring us back down to earth for a lot of fans. I think that people were expecting us to go in and beat a Premier League team who are very, very much comfortable in their side. There was 0 new starts for Palace, and Roy Hodgson hasn't playing well, and that's the kind of opposition we're going to be facing week in, week out. Those games against Wolves and Cardiff last year were among the toughest we had to face, and this year those games will be the easiest ones, which is quite a potent step up for Fulham. We're going to be having to look to make sure that our games at home are really count, that we can dominate against the lower half teams at home, and then hopefully get those points to stay up. But I do think that just remaining in the Premier League this year and then kicking on next year will be a success for Fulham. A lot of people talking about the amount of money that Fulham have spent this summer, but the truth is that we needed to spend that kind of amount just to compete in the Premier League. A lot of that squad last season were loans, and a lot of them came through in January, and other players who featured last season who very much aren't good enough for the Premier League. We've seen us invest heavily in the squad, which is what we needed. We only still have 26 first team players, including those brought through the youth academy. So it's not a particularly deep squad, and I think that while there's a lot of talk of how much Fulham spent against how much the likes of Wolves spent, they spent their money last year in making a squad that was good enough for the Premier League, never mind the Championship, and therefore were able to spend a little bit less this summer basically just refining the model that they had, whereas Fulham have needed to put in a real almost complete overhaul in order to get this squad up to Premier League ready. When you compare that to Spurs' spending this summer, or lack of spending, I think that's the key difference, that Fulham desperately needed to invest in order to build a squad able to compete, whereas Spurs already had that squad at their disposal. And I think a player that's kind of crucial here that no one's really talking about is Lucas Moura. Bringing him in January and giving him 6 months to settle into the Premier League, into Spurs, to get to know his teammates is such a crucial element of making him and getting the best out of him this year. I think that ultimately he's going to be a player that brings genuine quality. He was underutilised at PSG, and if Pochettino can get the best out of him, that'll be like having a new signing in the ranks. For me, this Spurs team will get top four again. I can see them competing, further into the season than they did last year, especially if things start a little bit brighter. And, with, Moura, as I said before, but also, those returning players and bringing the likes of Winks more into the squad. Obviously suffered with injuries last year, but I think he can be a player this year, especially in that central midfield role where it looks a little bit light for Spurs, that can make the difference. And I hope that, if those players continue to develop, that they can have a positive influence on your season and ultimately will push you further towards that kind of title, challenging place where you wish to be. I'm going to have to go heart over head in terms of a score prediction. I'm going to get Alexander Mitrovic to get himself on the score sheet early doors. Fulham to try and control the game, but ultimately potentially throw that lead away with 20 minutes to go or so. 1-1.
My prediction is Tottenham 2, Fulham 0. Harry Kane with both goals. He will score in August. Come on, you Spurs.